Psychoanalysis every day, the game of omnipotence. Namaste. Omnipotence is a word associated with theology and philosophy more than psychoanalysis. However, in arena of Klein and narcissism, the concept appears central. Conversation today enters everyday stationed on this concept, discoursed by our guide Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
So, how does omnipotence make an appearance in psychoanalysis?
Walking with the history of psychoanalysis, we see the first advent of the concept of omnipotence in Sigmund Freud. He used to call His Majesty the baby to signify the omnipotence that the baby feels. So he used to use this
Hmm.
very famous phrase, His Majesty the baby. And he was referring to the idea of primary narcissism, where the baby feels omnipotent. Taking the walk down the history of psychoanalysis, second, in Freud, we see it in primary narcissism, secondary narcissism, both the concept of omnipotence. In Jung, second station in psychoanalytic history, we see it in two ways. One, we see the concept of omnipotence indicated in being consumed by the king archetype or the queen archetype. And secondly, we see the concept of omnipotence working through Jung, unknown to Jung himself. So you see the power of it, that even those who theorize about it are not free from its overwhelming, blinding operation in their own self. In Jung, we see insidious, unconscious working of omnipotence in two ways. One is almost the worship of the collective unconscious and unconscious as a whole. So Jung looked very highly up to the unconscious, which includes both the personal and the collective. It was almost a worship of the unconscious. Secondly, Jung was always, along with the famous physicist uh, Pauli, who gave the Pauli's principle in quantum mechanics, both of them were in search of what is called the unus mundus. That if the archetypal design is the design of the human mind in potential, is there that kind of a design in nature in general, where the matter and the mind come together and we have one conceptual substratum, what he called the unus mundus, which would explain everything. And from physics side and from psychology side, both of them were trying to create a limited theory of everything in one sense. So that is the second way where we see that the concept of omnipotence is actually propelling them. Then we come to, by the way, this idea of unus mundus will also lead to the idea of design in the universe. And once you have design, you cannot escape the question of purpose. And you also cannot escape the question of the creator. Who created this design and for what purpose? And this obviously is a difficult thing for most materially driven philosophers and scientists. Third station in the history of psychoanalysis is Klein. And in Klein, we again see the concept of omnipotence in the split being open. So Klein believes that omnipotence is not something that we pursue unconsciously, but it also is involved in very early life thinking, where we don't know how to attenuate omnipotence. And therefore, the split being open, alternately, we put omnipotence on the all good object and the all bad object. And alternately, therefore, we experience the ecstasy of the all good object and the torture and the terror of the all bad object. So there we see in Klein that the idea of omnipotence is also central to both ecstasy and suffering. And the Kleinian route to healing obviously is to overcome this idea of omnipotence and move to the depressive position,
Hmm.
where the rest is seen both as a combination of the good and not good. And obviously, if you don't have adequate good experiences, you don't close the split. Or if the envy is too much, it can be difficulty in closing the split. Or if the addiction to the ecstasy is too much, you don't close it and you cling to omnipotence for rest of your life in different ways. So this is where we look at Klein. In psychotherapy in general, we see this concept of omnipotence working out in pathologies of psychosis, bipolar personality disorders in general, and narcissism. So we see this concept of omnipotence in therapy, that it is like an everyday thing. Any therapist who is dealing with difficult, chronic, long-standing issues will at some point deal with omnipotence. And Beyond had a very important take on it, that how do you generate this affect commensurate with the concept of omnipotence? And he said that the concept of infinity is central to it. That the concept of infinity, cognitively speaking, is involved in conceptualizing cognitively or generating affect related to something which then on becomes omnipotent. So the cognitive component of infinity is central to this whole idea of infinity, both positively and negatively. And one of the discussions we had where we said that often when we don't know what is happening, the unknown creates that fear of infinity, or creates the fear of that negative omnipotence, and anxiety rises. And the moment we give a label to it, as we said, the name closes the infinity. The name closes the concept of omnipotence. So this is very central to deep psychotherapy, the whole idea of omnipotence.
So, how does it move from the pathology to day life every day?
This is very interesting. In the history of psychoanalysis, most concepts have passed through these stages. Initially, something is discovered as extremely pathological. Then, after some years, we say this is found in normal people also. And then we say this also can have a positive use when put to, or rather, well put. So, finally, we come to this understanding that this is only an entity and it can be pushed to any process, abnormal, normal, or supernormal. And this has been the history of psychoanalysis with regard to many concepts. You take libido, you take aggression, you take narcissism, same with omnipotence. That finally we come to conclude that it is a independent entity which works out in pathological cases, normal cases, and supernormal cases. And it is just a question of optimizing it. So that is true about omnipotence as much it is true about so many concepts in psychoanalysis. And if we care to look about, omnipotence says hello to us every day, everywhere. These are old saying in psychiatry that you can't see what you don't know. Quite reverse to what is said in management, that you can't see what you know. Both are true. In the organizational setup, often you get so obsessed with what you know, you can't see anything new. And in the area of psychiatry, you can't see what you don't know. Both are true in different contexts. So when we don't know the concept of omnipotence, even though it's flushing all around us, we are not able to make out. But once we know the concept, we can identify it in operation all around us and inside us, because it's inseparably embedded into human life. So there is no way anybody is free from the concept of omnipotence. In fact,
What it would be if to have if this concept never existed? Would the pathologies would have taken a different shape? Or it is something which is very basic, essential for human life to exist?
it's a very good question, very deep question, difficult to answer question. Um, it's like saying, what would happen if the nature of things was not what it is? Because this is at the psychic level, it's one of the core elements that makes up what we call the nature of things.
True.
In the area of psychoanalysis, after so many years, we have come to some universals that libido, aggression, narcissism, and included in narcissism is omnipotence. These are like universal entities present in all psyche. So, if it was not there, we would have a completely different working of the human mind. For example, the split would not be troublesome. The
Correct.
infinity of desire would not work. And in all probability, we would have descended into inertia.
Mm.
Uh, the spiritual seeking would not be there. The problems of infinity would not be there. This whole game of transference of omnipotence and the entire social thing that follows, whether it is going mad after a political leader or a celebrity or buying something that the celebrity endorses, all of that would not be there, because omnipotence is everywhere.
It would demolish the envy and faith too.
It will definitely reduce, because it will uh, compel that the fundamental nature of a guru shishya relationship or a relationship between a seeker and God also will undergo a change. Because idealization, de-idealization, and omnipotence is quite involved in those relationships.
Right.
So it
How
will be
about the
very,
child and the parent dynamic?
yeah, that also will undergo a rapid change. Because we will see later on how it shifts from the child to the parent to the teacher to others. So there is a path through which omnipotence moves across the life of a child and the person. But what
That's
you
from
said,
self to another to, okay.
and when nobody is found, we find God or we find a mythological or a historical character on whom we can project safely to satisfy our need for projection. Because often the inner situation is such that it cannot be stabilized without an omnipotent object. And establishment of an omnipotent object inside the mind is a necessity for many people. So no amount of reason will uh, persuade them to give up omnipotence, because at a very deep level, it's a fundamental need to stabilize the psyche, without which unbearable anxiety would mount.
So does that mean that if we consider sometimes the spiritual process, if we see Buddha, Gautam Buddha, and we see him with the lens of Western world, that the omnipotence starts from the child, then to the parents, then to the universe, then to something to he's still in search of, and again it comes back to him.
Right.
Because even so is this one of a healthy way it took for him, or in the same version where there's no this evolutionary, the transformation of the soul has not taken place, it could have led to narcissism or some other kind of pathology? For him it became a spiritual process. So is this the aim of a human life, to take the whole cycle and bring it back to self?
Correct. So this is the spiritual process of starting with feeling one is omnipotent, realizing nobody is omnipotent, and uh, then undertaking the deep, profound acceptance of reality. And then there are two paths. One path is the Buddhist path, where you say nothing is omnipotent. And second is the theistic path, where you say there is some creator beyond manifestation who is omnipotent. But no
When
human
he
is
says
omnipotent.
that you become the light yourself, you become the enlightened one, you are the Buddha.
Correct, but you are
The
not
whole
omnipotent.
omnipotence, Asha, but you're not omnipotent.
You are not omnipotent. So
So
Buddha,
there's no nothing like omnipotence
no.
there.
So Buddha is known for being very realistic. That I am not a miracle performer. I know a process by which you can be free from grief and the cycle of rebirth, but I am not omnipotent. Nobody is.
Mm. Mm.
Nobody has answers to all the questions in the universe. So this profound acceptance of reality, that we search for omnipotence, but there is nobody who is omnipotent, and there is no product or article or situation which can give us omnipotence. It can only be a temporary high that we feel. Like if you want to have a Mercedes and after 10 years of working hard, you get it, you might feel omnipotent for a few days or a few hours, but very soon it goes off. There's nothing that will endure as omnipotence. And this also raises a spiritual question that maybe nature has put it into us so that we undertake the spiritual journey. And in that sense, the human psyche fundamentally has a spiritual element, a spiritual journey to it. That we are not able to give up omnipotence because we come from omnipotence if we want to go there. This would be the spiritual argument for why nature has allowed this thing to exist across evolution. Why it has survived the test of evolution. There must be something positive about it. So maybe the evolutionary path is such that it is essentially spiritual. So this would be the spiritual argument from evolutionary selection standpoint of omnipotence. Coming to where we were, we said what we don't know we can't see. But one simple way to see it is to see it as another word for infinity of desire.
Mm.
That the nature of desire is such, it is infinity. It cannot be satisfied. It wants variety and it's reoccurring. Nothing is quenched forever. That's the very nature of desire. That the desire is infinity. Like you have 1 billion, you want 10, you have 10, you want 100. There's no figure at which you feel quenched. So Buddha used to call it Trishna, the thirst that cannot quench. So what we see is that there is this infinity of desire that propels everyone. I have, you don't have. I know, you don't know. This race cannot stop. And this race keeps individuals and societies going. Counterpart is, if this race was to stop, because this race creates a lot of problems. It's not a problem-free race. But if you were to stop this race, men will slide into inertia, indolence, indulgence. It will be a worse situation than this. So, in the Indian spiritual context, we say this is the rajas which pulls us out of tamas and keeps societies going. And so, omnipotence not being there and rest of human nature keeping what it is, it's a more dangerous situation than one where omnipotence keeps us all moving.
Can it be that the omnipotence is the only way society comes into existence? Because probably there's no omnipotence concepts in animals. It's
Yeah.
about dominance.
So they have the concept of need, we have the concept of endless want. So they are not driven by omnipotence, we are driven by omnipotence, except in a few animals. Even in those few animals, we don't see the concept of omnipotence in an endless way. Like they want command over territory, they want command over women and children, but they stop at some point. Nobody in their species is like Alexander, I want to conquer the world. We don't have a Alexander chimpanzee or Alexander tiger or a lion.
It's more of dominance.
Yeah, and the omnipotence is limited. It's not endless like in human beings. We have an endless desire of omnipotence. So we can see it everywhere if we look at it, and it comes out in two ways. One, living it directly by acquisition of something, be it power, be it a product, be it a human being, whatever. And secondly, it comes out by living by identification. That if I cannot practice my omnipotence directly, I identify with somebody and live through him. That is how people identify so strongly with celebrities, with historical leaders. And if nobody is found, finally God. That you experience your omnipotence by identification. That if I cannot be omnipotent, somebody else is. I can't give up the desire. I can't undertake the mourning and reality acceptance and say, I have a desire for omnipotence, I cannot satisfy it. Let me do reality acceptance and mourning. The desire is too strong for it. So then what happens is you project it on somebody and live it by identification. And this happens all the time. You see it in the process of love. You see it in the process of hate. You see it in the process of celebrity endorsement. You see it in celebrity worship. You see it in spiritual circuits. You see it in relating to God. See it everywhere.
If we see the Kleinian and the Freudian concept of omnipotence, as you just mentioned in the beginning of the discussion, um, it appears to me that from the point of view of evolution, also human species psyche encounters this. This is one of the most complex psychic phenomena, which is the root cause for many other psychic phenomena.
Right.
It is so fundamental to human species.
Correct. Correct.
So yeah, so is this it can vary for people, the quantity of ability to have omnipotence.
Yeah, it does vary because
And what can be the factor in the beginning? For example, constitutionally, if somebody can have a capacity to have the omnipotence and somebody doesn't have the capacity to have omnipotence.
it's a good question. Um, Somebody may not have the capacity to close the split
Mm,
constitutionally, or
mm,
somebody undergo experiences that don't allow him to close the split, or the addiction of omnipotence may be so high that the ecstasy of the good breast cannot be given up. And in order to keep it alive, one is okay with the terror of the all bad breast. That you can't give up ecstasy, so you allow catastrophic thinking to happen. You pay the price of catastrophic thinking to keep the ecstasy alive. You can't
ecstasy.
let go of the ecstasy. Uh, Second is if somebody undergoes difficult phenomena which lead to psychosis, narcissism, or bipolar, then again one is impaired not to be oriented enough for reality acceptance. Because getting into depressive position essentially is reality acceptance.
Mm,
So it might be that one does not have the capacity or one does not have the environmental experiences to deal with attenuation of omnipotence and get into reality acceptance. Because the opposite of omnipotence will be reality acceptance,
100%.
where you prune the search for omnipotence to a manageable degree. And occasionally you indulge yourself in full experience of omnipotence by identification. That is how most healthy people live. That they don't have a pursuit of omnipotence in full-blooded, unattenuated way. They have a very practical pursuit of it. And occasionally they indulge themselves by identification with celebrity or some sort of person on whom omnipotence
Some
can.
idol.
But as you rightly said, many would be predisposed to not give up omnipotence. and they will either fall in the abnormal category or the extraordinary category. They will not fall
Fair
in
enough.
the mainstream 70% regular category who is attuned to reality acceptance.
So, can we get into this concrete examples of how we encounter the different flavors of omnipotence day to day throughout our lives?
There is a path of omnipotence. Omnipotence follows a path. First, we think of ourselves as omnipotent, as a baby, where Freud said, His Majesty the baby. And then we realize that we can't even turn without the help of others. We can't feed ourselves, we can't save ourselves. So then parents appear omnipotent. They can do everything we can't do. Very soon we realize the parents are not omnipotent, so we project it onto teachers. And at every stage it happens that the desire is too strong to be given up. So instead of doing mourning and reality acceptance, we keep finding new possibilities.
Displacing.
Yeah, displacing it. We keep finding new possibilities. The teachers become omnipotent. Like if the parent says something, the child will not listen to it. But if the teacher says something, he will listen to it. And they speak so highly in the first few years about the teachers. Because the omnipotence is projected onto the teacher. Right? Then one can look at the rich man in the society. As one grows up, some rich man in the society or somebody who has a very good appearance or has assets or power, on him it gets projected. What Freud calls the family romance. That the child starts feeling that I actually belong to that upmarket family, not my family. Then we can look at, I still remember how this projection happens. I can give a few examples. When I was very young, and this I am referring to about 78 to 82, that period, bikes used to be very uncommon, very rare. And there were three bikes at that time, Enfield Bullet, Java, and Yazdi.
Mm.
And you had scooters, one or three scooters, Bajaj and somebody else. So
Labrador.
Bajaj
Lambretta.
Labrador, after that LML.
LML Vespa.
So I remember there was a person, Mr. Gupta, I think. He used to be very good looking and he used to come with his Yazdi or Java. And as a child, I was projecting omnipotence onto him. He looked somebody out of
Ah,
this world. Somebody who was young, who was handsome, who was well educated, and somebody who was on that uh, bullet which nobody else had. It looked very sophisticated, very upmarket, very different from my parents and all those who are living near me. They looked very ordinary, very desi, very unaesthetic, very less surreal, too real. So this man looked very surreal, and I projected omnipotence onto him. There is a very good story in Garhwali literature on this.
okay.
There is a story of Garhwali Hills, where there is a government servant, a boy of about uh, 21 years of age. And because it's an isolated hamlet, a few kilometers away, there is a government office. And this boy's job is to go there every morning, and whatever government regulations come, he is supposed to beat the drum in the village and communicate loudly to everybody that this is the new regulation which has come from this is the message coming from the government. It may be related to weather, related to public distribution system, whatever. In that locality, there is a family that is relatively rich, and there is a girl of the family who is very good looking. And this man tries to talk to her when he passes through the house, always tries to look at her, almost stare at her. But of course, he would not have the courage to go and express his admiration or love. And he projects omnipotence on that girl. As it happens, her father makes a loss in business, and government decides to auction his house, and they have to move out. And he is given the task of announcing this, that they have gone bankrupt and they have to move out. And he refuses to do it and loses his job. And they threaten him with imprisonment for defying government orders. but he's allowed to let go because his father is not there. He only has an old mother. So they take pity upon him and allow him to let go. But he cannot break that omnipotence. He cannot do what an ordinary person would just think to be his job. And then he has to feed himself. There's nothing to do. So he goes to the city and starts working as a laborer in a mill. And he gets old. But across his life, he keeps dreaming of that house and that girl. And when he is old, we come to that part of the story when he is talking to somebody and somebody asks him, was it worth it? And he's confused. But after some time, he says, yes, there's no way I could have done anything else because he's still in the grip of that omnipotence and those memories and that nostalgia soaked in omnipotence. And he has
Hmm.
practically lived all his life in those dreams and memories of that house and that girl. And a lot of it is his own creation. There was never, much of it never happened in the real world. So this is a very good example of omnipotence that we find. I have a friend who keeps fantasizing about a girl that he used to fantasize in school. And that friend of mine is about 52 now, but he still fantasizes about the girl and he still sees her as she was 10 or 12 years of age.
Oh. And we call it love.
He still fantasizes about her and he knows her now because both of them are now 50 to 54 kind of 50 to 52. And he says, I cannot fantasize her as she is. I always fantasize her as she was at X point in time, 10 years, 12 years, 16 years, whatever it is. So that is his projection of omnipotence. He can't let go. It's stuck there. He's fixated.
Such omnipotences can be broken, broken by marriages, the eye
Correct.
openers.
Correct. Correct. I mean, familiarity is the best medicine for omnipotence.
Omnipotence, antidote.
Right. Right. So then we have, uh, let us say, somebody is a rich and good looking woman in a small town, and every ordinary person dreams of talking to her, having coffee with her, and even that is out of the world for him because omnipotence is projected. I'm sure many people would have projected omnipotence on you.
Talk
Then,
about it.
yeah. So then we have uh, political leaders on whom their followers project omnipotence. And the followers have intense love for one leader and intense hate for the other. The split is open and omnipotence is at work. Then we have film stars where people just want to touch them, have an autograph. Just look at it rationally. I mean, how do you see this whole game of autograph? There's so much of omnipotence loaded in that act that people spend some time, have a breakfast, and recount it even 20, 25 years later. I had breakfast with X or I met X, or while
Even
he
with
was
sports stars.
right, sports stars, that while that rally was passing from here, he looked at me and waved at me.
Yeah.
Now, all of this is because of omnipotence. If you take out omnipotence, he's just another man of 50 kg on two legs. He has same anxieties as you have. He has same ignorance as you have. He's stumbling through life like you are stumbling through. Because it's a human condition that we all have to stumble through life. The best we can do is to stumble better. But nobody can have a perfect path to perfection. The entire movie experience is loaded with experience of omnipotence by identification. You identify with the actor and you live out your aggression, your libido, your desires, and so on. Imitating the omnipotent, that also is a very big area of vicariously living it out. Like wearing the dresses he dresses, wearing the brands he uses, the whole advertising arena of celebrity endorsement works on primarily on uh, the transfer of omnipotence from the actor to the product. Without it, there would
When
be
you
no
talk
celebrity
about
endorsement.
When you talk about that, I remember somewhere back in 60s and 70s, this omnipotence phenomena was way too stronger, it seems, in the society as compared to what it is. No wonder we are encountering more of narcissist people, because there are no idols, and there is so much of information about every individual. The
Correct.
fantasy and the fancy part of there has the reality check also, so people are not able to have their share of omnipotence. It's just the people from vernacular background who can have such thing. That's, is that the reason there is so much of narcissism? Because now you have no one out there, so people are just feeding themselves with the desire of having an omnipotent potent phenomena to be satiated. It is projected inwards, even if it is not a healthy version.
Uh, there are two, three reasons for it. One reason is, as you rightly said, there are no legitimate objects who deserve the projection, because you also have to deserve the projection to some extent.
Exactly.
You may be deserving 5%, and 95% would be just the need of the person, but at least 5% has to be there. You can't project it on anybody. So, as you said rightly, uh, information and TV cameras, they bring about such intimate closeness that the projections fall. And you know too much about people to really believe they are omnipotent. So, knowledge kills. That is one part. Second part of what you referred to narcissism, there are some other components of narcissism also, because it is now almost like an epidemic, psychological epidemic. So there the reasons are, one is very severe object deprivation at all levels.
Mm.
Working parents is one thing, nuclear family is second, and isolation from neighborhood. Like nobody opens up the door of anybody living next door. The whole idea of privacy, because the second face of the coin of privacy is object deprivation. That once you have privacy and you don't open the door of the neighbor, on one hand it's privacy, on the second hand is object deprivation and contact deprivation, relationship deprivation. And then you have early life losses which people don't know how to manage. And then you have very little training for capacity building, and so you have fragility. So all this put together and a few more reasons create that epidemic of narcissism. Um, we have fragile narcissism coming up in Wokism also.
Mm.
It's the rage of the fragile, frustrated narcissist. We are nearing